Hey, Jolo. I'm an English lad who used to be well into camping when I was a teen. Me and some buds would head out to the moors whenever we could, pile into Declan's car on a Friday night, and disappear into the wild with tents. A few drinks, disposable barbecues, and plenty of meat for grilling. We first got into camping back in school, thanks to the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and it stuck with us every summer break at uni. We weren't all that sporty. Finn was the rugby guy, Declan always drove, and the rest of us were just different types of close friends. No matter how grown up we tried to seem, deep down, we were just kids trying to escape the stress of life. That's why we loved heading out to the wild. Mud, morning mist, that damp English air, just to forget everything for a few days. It was our little ritual every summer, and exactly what we planned for the end of sophomore year. The first night was always the same: cheap beer, barbecue, and off-key songs around the campfire. The air would get thick with wood smoke and damp earth, bringing back that familiar sense of freedom. We'd talk about anything: school, the future, girls we never had the nerve to talk to, under a sky so clear it felt like you could touch the stars. All the pressures of exams and life faded away. It was youth at its best. So the next morning, when we woke up with headaches and stumbled out of our tents, we were surprised to see an older hippie couple setting up their tent nearby. This was our secret spot, with a fire pit we'd built ourselves, and we'd never seen anyone else here. Their arrival felt like our private world had just been intruded on. We pulled ourselves together and went over to say hi, hoping they'd have good stories or maybe a little weed to share. The woman had wild hair, thick glasses, and a warm but distant smile. The guy was big, bearded, wearing a patched-up army jacket and a hat covered with pins and fishing hooks. A real wandering soul. But it was the hat that really caught my eye. Some of the pins, a Celtic knot, a fishing hook, sparked a hazy memory. I looked closer at his eyes, that familiar smile. The beard covered most of his face, but those eyes brought it all back. "Hey, are you Mr. Fletcher?" I blurted out. "You used to teach art at my school?" He nodded slowly. When he brushed his beard aside, I recognized my old teacher from secondary school. He used to be clean-shaven, with a kind face, always encouraging us to be creative. I missed him when he left. Declan and Toby recognized him too. And for a moment, it felt like we were kids again. The whole morning was suddenly filled with a sense of nostalgia and surprise. Mr. Fletcher introduced Hazel as his partner. There was something almost ethereal about her, like someone who belonged in a fairy tale rather than the muddy moors. We helped them pitch their tent and made some small talk. They mentioned having parked in the same lot as us, and even recognized Declan's car, which struck me as oddly observant. When we asked how they'd found our secret spot, Hazel claimed they had camped there before and were grateful for our fire pit. We'd never noticed any sign of other visitors, but honestly, we never looked that closely. After sharing some sandwiches and crisps, we all went our separate ways for a hike. Ben, as usual, had wandered off on his own, a habit of his, so we didn't think much of it that afternoon, and when we came back to camp, Ben still hadn't returned, but Mr. Fletcher and Hazel were there, waiting. We ended up spending the evening together. The sun set, painting the sky orange and purple, and Kyle put on some music, a mix of classic rock and indie, while we fried up steaks and cracked open more beers. It was one of those nights you end up romanticizing. Music, wood smoke, laughter, and the sense of freedom that comes from being young and a little bit wild. Mr. Fletcher entertained us with stories about teaching, the swinging 60s, his time in the Army, and his life as a wandering camper. He was a natural storyteller with a deep, charismatic voice. Hazel was mostly quiet, occasionally joining in with jokes about being vegan and gently teasing us about our love of steak, but never crossing the line into mean-spiritedness. I did notice that they hadn't brought any food or drink to share, which felt a little odd, but I still half expected them to pass around some weed. As the night wore on, Mr. Fletcher finally produced a selection of drugs: weed, LSD, pills, and a big bag of dried mushrooms. He claimed they'd picked the mushrooms that day, but they were clearly dried and packaged, not fresh. Declan asked for a joint, but Mr. Fletcher was strangely reluctant to share. Instead, he and Hazel kept nudging me to try some acid. The pressure was subtle at first, then more persistent. When I refused, they offered me a pill, insisting it was free. But I wasn't interested, no matter how much they tried to convince me. In the end, I took a few drags off a joint just to keep the peace, and then they started making mushroom tea, boiling water in our kettle and tossing in a handful of shrooms. The musty smell filled the air. When I asked if the mushrooms were safe, Mr. Fletcher just shrugged and said, "I guess so." Declan grabbed a cup before they could object and downed it in one go. I don't think he'd ever done shrooms before, so I was honestly worried. Sure enough, not long after, he got up, grinning like a maniac, and wandered off into the woods by himself. A wave of panic hit me as I realized my friends were in no state to take care of themselves. Declan was stumbling through the woods, hallucinating. Toby and Kyle had passed out in their tents. Ben was nowhere to be found. Mr. Fletcher and Hazel kept pressing me to drink mushroom tea or take a tab of acid. My fear built up until I was overwhelmed, sick to my stomach, and regretting every decision that led me here. Hazel tried to comfort me, leading me back to the fire, but Mr. Fletcher pressed a mug of mushroom tea to my lips. I faked a sip, hoping they would leave me alone. My mind was spinning, and the world seemed to twist with paranoia and confusion. The couple grew more insistent, touching me, trying to get me to take a pill. When I refused, things turned disturbing. Their hands were everywhere, and I felt utterly violated. I spat the pill out and shouted at them to back off, just as Declan collapsed in a heap nearby, lost in his own hallucinations. Whether from paranoia, drugs, or both, the night became a nightmare of warped faces and shadows. Mr. Fletcher's features seemed monstrous. I tried to crawl away, desperate to escape. Suddenly, Ben burst from the trees, swinging a thick branch and shouting. He drove Mr. Fletcher and Hazel away, smashed their tent, and rushed to my side, forcing me to drink some soda and helping me come back to reality. Together, we screamed at the couple as they fled into the woods. I woke at dawn, shaken and exhausted. Ben explained what had happened. He had stayed sober and, recognizing Mr. Fletcher from a bad experience years before, kept an eye on us from a distance. When things turned dangerous, he intervened. Ben never gave us all the details, but it was clear Fletcher had a history of inappropriate behavior. Looking back, I am grateful Ben was there. Our camping trips were never quite the same after that, and I can only hope Fletcher and Hazel never found another group to prey on. In the early 2010s, my buddy Ryan and I, both native Californians, had a tradition of escaping the city to go camping in the Sierra Nevada. This majestic mountain range was our sanctuary, a place where nature washed away the stress of daily life. We'd pitch our tent in the shadow of Mount Whitney, or explore the quiet shores of Lake Tahoe, always searching for new, untouched places. Back then, I loved recording our adventures online, filling LiveJournal and Tumblr with enthusiastic, sometimes overly poetic, descriptions of the wilderness. Ryan, meanwhile, was the photographer of our duo. He brought his Nikon everywhere, determined to capture every moment perfectly, and even entered online competitions. His excitement was contagious when we finally stumbled upon a pristine camping spot, completely off the grid and unmentioned in any Sierra Nevada forums. The air was crisp and clear as we set up our tent beneath towering pine trees. We cooked burgers on our stove, the scent mingling with the earthy smell of the forest. That night was peaceful, filled with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. We woke refreshed, to sunlight streaming through the canopy, ready to explore this wild, promising new place. The area where we had camped was split by a small river, a vein of cold, clear water winding through the landscape. We followed its course upstream, moving past rocky outcrops and thick brush, heading toward the base of a small mountain. High overhead, a golden eagle circled, a solitary king surveying its domain. Ryan paused, captivated, his lens following its graceful arc. A bit later, a flash of tawny fur on a distant ridge caught my eye. A mountain lion, thankfully far away, prowled across the rocks. It was a reminder of the raw, untamed nature of this wilderness, a thrilling and humbling sight. We eventually broke for lunch in the cool shade of a cliff face. I jotted notes in my journal, sketching a few lines of purple prose, while Ryan continued snapping photos. He disappeared behind some rocks. Then I heard his voice, a shout of pure excitement. I stopped writing and headed over, the crunch of pine needles under my boots the only sound besides my own heartbeat. Ryan had found a cave. The gaping, shadowy maw in the rock face gave me an immediate sense of dread. It felt less like an opening and more like a wound in the earth. I suggested we move on. The Sierra Nevada is known for black bears and other predators, and this could easily have been a den. But Ryan, ever the adventurer, insisted on getting a few photographs of the opening. We were both armed with bear spray and bravado, so it did not seem too risky. We stepped into the entrance and were swallowed by a darkness so thick it felt like a weight. Outside, the sun beat down on the mountain, but inside, we were in pitch black. I snapped on my flashlight, a thin beam cutting through the abyss, and warned Ryan against using his flash, not wanting to startle anything that might be lurking. The cavern seemed to descend deep into the rock. Curiosity got the better of me. I took a step forward, and something crunched under my boot. I aimed my light down. It was a bone, the leg of a deer, or maybe a cow, stripped clean, just as a shiver ran down my spine. Ryan's hand clamped onto my arm, and he whispered, nudging my light upward. There was movement deep in the cave. My hand tensed, hovering over my holstered pistol, trying to decide if I should draw. Then Ryan spoke, his voice low but steady. It's a person. A shadow darted across the beam. It was humanoid, pale flesh flashing for a split second. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the oppressive dark. Ryan was whispering, desperate to get out, to hightail it out of there. He was right. Every instinct screamed to run. But a part of me, the part raised on my uncle's cautionary tales, was curious. He used to tell me stories about families living in caves, and as a kid, it always sounded like a myth. The idea of meeting a true mountain person, someone who had forsaken the modern world, was strangely captivating. Then, Ryan snapped me back to reality with a forceful, "Dude, don't be a moron," and began dragging me toward the exit. I called out one last time. "Hello?" The echo came back, but this time it was answered by a disembodied voice from the darkness. "Get gone." Then a string of expletives followed, a torrent of crude language that shattered any romantic notion I had. It was not the voice of some feral mountain man. It sounded like the junkies I had seen panhandling on the street. My illusion was shattered. We ran out of the cave, tails between our legs, and decided that was enough exploration for one day. It was time to head back to our tent. The area where we camped was split by a small river, cold and clear, winding through the landscape. We followed it upstream, passing rocks and thick brush, toward the base of a mountain. Overhead, a golden eagle circled. Ryan paused to photograph it. Soon after, I spotted a mountain lion prowling a distant ridge, a thrilling reminder of this land's wildness. We ate lunch in the shade of a cliff. I wrote in my journal while Ryan snapped photos, then disappeared behind some rocks. His sudden shout drew me over. He had found a cave, a dark opening in the rock that filled me with unease. It looked more like a wound than an entrance. I wanted to move on, wary of bears, but Ryan insisted on getting photos. Armed with bear spray and bravado, we stepped inside. Darkness swallowed us. I switched on my flashlight, warning Ryan not to use his flash. The cave seemed to descend deep into the earth. My curiosity pulled me forward, but when I stepped on a bone, a shiver ran down my spine. Ryan grabbed my arm and pointed my light ahead. There was movement. A pale, human-like figure darted across the beam. I called out, my voice echoing in the dark. Ryan urged me to leave. I hesitated, briefly imagining some mountain hermit, but Ryan pulled me back. As I called out once more, a rough voice answered from the darkness, cursing at us to get lost. Any daydreams I had vanished. We hurried out of the cave and decided to call it a day, heading back to our tents. About 6 years ago, I was dating a girl I'll call Laura. We had been together for about 8 months when this story happened. Ours seemed like a normal, happy relationship. The kind where you share inside jokes, road trips, and lazy weekends, but with an understanding that we both valued independence. Laura often talked about not wanting to rush things, and I was careful not to repeat old mistakes by coming on too strong. Instead of moving in together, we made getaways our thing, weekend trips to see my family, shopping excursions, and even a blitz of theme parks over a few weekends. I loved those trips, the way each playlist or strange roadside diner seemed to bring us closer. I thought about the future a lot, sometimes even imagining us living together, maybe more, down the line. I was sure our foundation was solid. Of course, if I'm saying all this, you know something was about to go wrong. We'd never tried camping together before, so that fall, we picked Rhode Island as an easy first. The state's campgrounds were praised for being scenic but accessible, and we found one that wasn't too remote or too crowded. It was early fall, leaves just starting to turn, and as we drove through the forests of New England, Laura couldn't stop talking about the colors and crisp air. The campsite itself was lovely, quiet, tucked on the edge of the grounds, with a pond shining in the afternoon sun and a forest right behind us. I remember calling it idyllic and feeling a little embarrassed by how happy I sounded. The first night was perfect. hot dogs over the fire, laughing in the tent, a moonlit walk by the pond. I thought, this is what happiness feels like. I woke up the next morning to Laura screaming. It was a raw, panicked sound that jolted me out of sleep. I rushed outside to chaos. Our campsite was trashed. Food and trash scattered everywhere, as if some wild animals or vandals had gone on a rampage. My heart sank when I saw the car. The back windshield was shattered. Deep scratches gouged the paint, and the trunk was open with everything rifled through. Our cooler, which had been locked in the car, was now in pieces. Its contents, burgers, sausages, mac and cheese, smeared across the dirt. But the weirdest thing was our phones. Both had been smashed and tossed under a tree. Glass and plastic everywhere. Laura's suitcase was open, clothes flung into the bushes, with a few pieces of her underwear left on display. The scene made my skin crawl. Laura insisted a group of frat boys we'd seen the day before were to blame, that they'd come over in the night, maybe drunk, to mess with us. She said she'd glimpsed them by the camp entrance, but admitted it was too dark to be certain. I asked if anyone else had heard or seen anything, but she was evasive, clearly shaken. We cleaned up what we could, but I was angry and anxious. My car was my pride and joy, and the cost of repairs for the window and paint alone would be huge. We called the police, and a park ranger showed up hours later. He shrugged, said there was little he could do, and chalked it up to kids being stupid. Laura surprised me by begging to stay. She argued we could tape a tarp over the broken window, buy new supplies at the camp store, and not let the vandals ruin our vacation. Something about her insistence made me uneasy. But she seemed so determined, so I agreed. Maybe I just didn't want to let fear win. At the camp store, as we picked out supplies, Laura and I got into an argument over something trivial. I don't even remember what, but her reaction was so out of proportion, shouting that I never listened, storming out, leaving me standing at the register. It was the first time I'd seen her lose her temper like that, and it rattled me. When I went to look for her, I spotted a group of young guys. I asked if they'd seen anything strange or anyone suspicious. They seemed friendly and confused, saying they hadn't seen anyone under 40 except us. One of them quietly asked if I was okay, mentioning that the woman I was with seemed volatile and angry. That comment lingered with me as I wandered back to the campsite alone, a dull sense of dread growing in my chest. The bizarre argument over hot dogs still lingered in my mind, but what truly unsettled me was the stranger's words outside the camp store. When he told me Laura seemed volatile and angry, it wasn't just a casual comment. It stuck with me, planting a seed of doubt as I walked back to our campsite, weighed down by groceries and growing unease. The thought that Laura could be capable of such a public outburst didn't fit with the person I thought I knew. When I returned, the campsite was silent, except for the faint sound of Laura sobbing inside the tent. My frustration evaporated, replaced by worry. I dropped the bags and hurried over, unzipping the tent to find her curled up, shaking with tears. All I wanted was to comfort her, so I crawled inside and wrapped my arm around her. It took a while for her to calm down enough to speak. Eventually, she whispered that while I was at the store, 3 men came to our site. She said they were aggressive, threatening, and had made crude advances toward her. When she refused them, one of them kicked a dent into my car. Fury and disbelief surged inside me. I wanted to protect her, to get answers, and to report this to the authorities. But as I gently asked for more details, what they looked like, if she was okay. Laura's demeanor shifted abruptly. Her tears turned to anger. "How can you be so thoughtless?" she screamed. "You're grilling me like a suspect. Do you think I'm lying?" I was stunned. My only concern was her safety. But her outburst was so sudden, so intense, that it reignited the unease from earlier. Something was wrong. Despite everything, Laura remained adamant about staying. She insisted if we left, we'd be letting them win. All I wanted was to leave, but she was relentless. That night, we sat around the campfire, barely speaking, the tension thick between us. As I stared into the flames, the pieces began to fall into place. The supposed frat boy vandals no one else had seen. The three men who threatened Laura but vanished without a trace. The fact that the only other campers our age denied seeing anything. And then, the detail that had nagged at me since morning, the smashed phones. I finally asked, my voice quiet, "Laura, how did they smash our phones?" She froze. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed in anger and fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The truth was suddenly obvious. The phones had been in the tent with us all night. Her silence broke into screaming accusations, demanding to know what I was implying, insisting I was accusing her. Her reaction was so wild, so desperate, that all the red flags I'd ignored now formed a single, undeniable warning. It was clear Laura was behind it all. Finally, the dam broke. Laura collapsed in tears, confessing everything in a rush. She was terrified I'd leave her, convinced I cared more about my car than about her, and desperate to create a crisis that would draw us closer. I listened in stunned silence as she explained her fears, her jealousy, her plan to make me prove I loved her by protecting her. For a long moment, I just sat there, empty and numb. The woman I'd thought I knew was a stranger. I knew we couldn't stay. I packed up in silence. Laura begged to try to salvage the trip, but I couldn't. The drive home was silent and tense. The broken glass in the back seat a harsh reminder of everything that had unraveled. The drive home was the longest, most awkward journey of my life. The rattling tarp over the shattered rear window was a physical reminder of everything that had happened. Laura and I sat in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. I kept replaying her confession, struggling to reconcile the woman I loved with the one who had just upended our lives. Despite everything, I still wanted to help her. I believed Laura needed real support, not anger. When we arrived at her apartment in the early morning darkness, I helped her with her bags. We agreed to talk again after some rest. She nodded, eyes hollow, and disappeared inside. I drove home, exhausted and heartbroken. The next morning, determined to help, I tried to reach out, but Laura had blocked me everywhere: phone, email, social media. Soon, messages from our mutual friends started to arrive, each one accusing me of having hurt her, of being cruel. That's when I realized Laura had already told her version of the story, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. No one would listen to my side. Even when I tried to explain, it only made things worse. I had no choice but to cut ties, with her and with most of our friends. Eventually, I moved to a new state, hoping for a fresh start. Even years later, the scars lingered. Sometimes, I still get anonymous messages calling me a liar or a cheat. Once, far from anywhere Laura had ever been. My car was scratched in a way that brought old memories rushing back. Maybe it was just bad luck, but the old fear never completely left. It's quieter now, a dull background hum, but it's there. With time and the gentle patience of my wife Anna, I learned to trust again. The early years of our relationship were hard. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Anna's love is steady, and the paranoia has faded to a whisper. Now we are married, and she's expecting our first child. Life is peaceful. But whenever Anna suggests a camping trip, I can only reply, absolutely not. When I was much younger, I did a lot of reckless things just to impress a girl. Most of them I'd rather not talk about now, but the most dangerous one I'm willing to admit is the night I agreed to protest a fracking development in a tiny Sussex village. The word fracking sounded violent and unfamiliar, something I'd only half heard on late-night news. But Amy, this girl I was smitten with, spoke about it with such fierce passion that I found myself swept along. She painted pictures of poisoned groundwater, ancient chalk hills under threat, the soul of the English countryside hanging in the balance. I nodded along, pretending to share her outrage, when all I really wanted was her approval, and maybe a chance to hold her hand. We joined a ragtag group of protesters and camped in a field near the contested site. Banners staked in the mud, a few tents clustered together against the autumn chill. The protest itself was uneventful, until the night the farmer showed up. We heard the shouts first, then the unmistakable metallic clatter of a shotgun being cocked. In our panic, Amy and I didn't run towards the other protesters. The idea of safety in numbers never crossed my mind. Instead, pure animal instinct kicked in. We bolted in the opposite direction, away from the distant glow of campfires and into the pitch-black woods. The road between the villages shone under the moon, a tempting escape route, but it felt like suicide to run out into the open. The image of the farmer, furious and possibly drunk, taking aim at us, made the choice easy. I grabbed Amy's hand and yanked her into the trees, hoping she'd keep pace, hoping she wouldn't hate me for it later. The undergrowth swallowed us. Within seconds, branches whipped at our faces, brambles snagged our clothes, roots threatened to trip us with every step. Amy's hand slipped from mine as the forest grew denser, and suddenly I was alone. The darkness was absolute. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the whisper of leaves, felt magnified, sinister. I tried whispering Amy's name, but my throat was tight with fear, and the words barely escaped. I could hear the ragged sound of her breathing somewhere nearby, the frantic thud of her footsteps on the soft earth, but I couldn't see her. The Sussex woods, which had seemed so gentle and storybook-like by day, now pressed in close, ancient and menacing. My mind conjured up every horror movie I'd ever seen, especially the Blair Witch Project, and for a moment the farmer with the shotgun faded, replaced by nameless terrors lurking just out of sight. I crashed through the darkness, barking my shins on fallen logs, nearly running face first into a massive oak, maybe the same tree, over and over. At some point, I tripped on a root and landed hard, pain shooting up my knee. It was enough to snap me out of my terror for a moment, to remind me I was still alive, still running. But I'd lost Amy. I wasn't sure when or how. I could hear her sometimes, but the gaps between us grew wider with every stumbling step. My heart pounded in my ears. My lungs burned. I was scraped raw. For one awful moment, I thought about giving up, about curling up in the leaves and waiting for morning. But the thought of the farmer's shotgun, somewhere in the dark, kept me moving. Then, suddenly, a cry cut through the night. "Amy!" Her voice was sharp, panicked. A sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. For a split second, I froze. Then fear gave way to something else, a desperate, protective urge. I ran toward the sound, not caring about the branches clawing at my face, not even thinking about the pain in my legs. All I could think was that I had dragged her into this, and now she needed me. The trees thinned just enough for me to see a patch of moonlight. And there she was, Amy, cornered against a fallen tree. The farmer loomed over her, shotgun glinting in his hands. He wasn't pointing it at her, not yet, but the threat was clear in the way he held it, his posture rigid with anger. He hadn't noticed me, not yet, and that gave me the barest sliver of hope. Or maybe just a reckless idea. My mind raced through a dozen terrible possibilities. Should I shout? Should I try to distract him? Should I run and get help? All I knew was that I couldn't let him hurt her. Out of the three of us, he was the only one who seemed to know exactly where he was or what he was willing to do. After that night, everything felt slightly out of focus, as if the world had tilted on its axis and then settled somewhere new. Amy and I walked back to the protest camp together, our clothes torn and streaked with mud, leaves tangled in our hair. The others had heard the commotion, but with the constant threat of confrontation from locals and authorities, most had assumed it was just another argument or a false alarm. When they saw us emerge from the woods with the farmer in tow, no longer brandishing a shotgun, but instead smiling and chatting, they looked at us like we'd returned from another planet. We sat around the campfire, the farmer surprising everyone by accepting a cup of instant coffee and listening to the protesters' stories. There was something almost dreamlike about it, the night's terror dissolving into warmth and conversation, the boundaries between us and them blurring in the glow of the fire. Amy, still a bit shaken, managed a laugh when someone pointed out her ripped Spider-Man shirt. I caught her eye, and for a moment, we just grinned at each other, the night's strangeness settling into something almost gentle. Eventually, the farmer said his goodbyes, promising to think about what we'd discussed and to keep his rusty old gun for scaring off foxes, not protesters. As he disappeared into the dark, the camp settled down, and Amy and I found ourselves side by side on a log, staring up at the stars peeking through the canopy. We talked quietly, voices soft with exhaustion. She thanked me for what I'd done, though we both knew my gallant lie about the protest being my idea had been mostly nerves and desperation. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden spark of romance, but there was a new kind of closeness, a friendship forged in fear and relief. The next morning, we packed up our things and headed back to the city. The protest would continue without us. For weeks afterward, I kept replaying the events in my mind, the fear and absurdity of it all. I'd find myself chuckling at the thought of the farmer's rusty, useless shotgun, or the unlikely image of us drinking tea in his kitchen. Sometimes, late at night, I'd message Amy, and we'd joke about our near-death experience, the inside joke growing with each retelling. Amy and I never dated, but for years, whenever one of us faced something frightening or ridiculous, we'd remind each other, at least it's not a farmer with a shotgun. It became a shorthand for surviving the unexpected, for finding humor in fear, and for knowing that sometimes the wildest adventures leave you with the best stories and the strangest friends. Looking back now, I realize that night changed the way I saw risk, and maybe even the way I saw myself. I stopped pretending to care just to impress someone else and learned the value of honesty. Sometimes, even a noble lie can save you, but it's better to just be real. I'm still not a fan of protests, and the word fracking still makes me wince. But I'll always be grateful for the night I ran through the Sussex woods, terrified and alive, and came out the other side with a story worth telling. My name is Anton, and I'm from Germany. If my English isn't perfect, I apologize. I learned by watching American TV and traveling. I've always been a solitary adventurer, trekking across Europe's wildest places, the Alps, the Black Forest, the Scottish Highlands, perhaps arrogantly. I thought there was little left in nature that could truly unsettle me. But Appalachia is different. It was the summer of 2016, and the call of those ancient American mountains had grown too strong to ignore. I returned to the U.S., more prepared and determined to experience the wilderness as deeply as I could. I started out on marked trails, but soon found myself wandering off the beaten path. One humid evening, deep in a valley shrouded by enormous hemlock trees, I found a half-ruined stone chimney standing alone among the ferns. No house, no road, just this fragment of a forgotten home. I decided to camp nearby, drawn to such lonely relics that felt like portals to the past. The night was thick and warm, alive with the calls of whip-poor-wills and the flickering of fireflies. I cooked a small meal, wrote in my journal, and felt perfectly at peace. As I lay down, drifting toward sleep, I heard the faintest sound of music drifting through the woods. At first, I thought it was a radio or other campers, but the tune was strange, old, lilting, played on a fiddle, with a melody I couldn't place. It seemed to circle my campsite, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sitting up, heart pounding, I listened. The music grew louder, and I could hear feet moving softly through the leaves, as if someone or something was dancing just beyond the firelight. I called out, asking if anyone was there. The music stopped. The woods fell silent, so suddenly it made my ears ring. Then, from the direction of the old chimney, a woman's voice said, softly but clearly, "Won't you join the reel?" I scrambled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and pointed it toward the chimney. There was nothing but mist and shadows. The air had grown cold. For a moment, I felt frozen by a mix of fear and curiosity, as if something was waiting for my answer. The voice called again, closer this time. "Come dance, traveler." Suddenly, the fireflies swirled in a strange pattern, forming a ring of light around the old stones. For a moment, I saw figures, pale, insubstantial, dressed in the ragged clothes of another century, circling, holding hands, their faces both joyful and mournful. I backed away, shaking, and in a trembling voice I said, "No, thank you. I am just passing through." The lights dimmed, the music faded, the woods returned to normal, but the chill lingered. I lay awake the rest of the night, hearing the echo of the fiddle in every gust of wind. At dawn, I packed up and left that place behind. I never found the chimney again, though I searched on the map and in person. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed it all, but I can still hear that melody in my memory, a tune not meant for the living. Since that night, I have never camped near ruins, and I have never again danced in the woods alone. The chanting continued, a relentless, disembodied chorus in the deep, black night. It was no longer a vague threat. It was directed at me. They knew I was there. They were speaking to me. If you leave, you'll die. If you leave, you'll die. My mind raced, grappling with the meaning. Leave where? The trail? This spot? I called out, my voice trembling. Leave where? The response came, chilling and close. Leave the tent? A beat of silence. Then another voice, low and menacing. If you leave the tent, you will die. Will you kill me? I asked, my bravado gone. There was no reply, only another strange, haunting howl. Then, again, the dire warning, if you leave, you'll die. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. I heard footsteps and the rustle of leaves as they seemed to circle my small shelter. The terror was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Never before, in all my solo adventures, had I felt a human threat so direct and malevolent. I shifted in the tent, trying to reposition myself, and a voice outside immediately called out, sharp and commanding, "Do not come out." My grip on the hunting knife was so tight my knuckles ached. The footsteps grew frantic. Then came shouts and a commotion, a conflict that seemed to have nothing to do with me. Through it all, a different voice outside my tent told me to stay put. My mind spun with fear and confusion. I saw the glow of my campfire flare up through the canvas, reignited by one of the strangers. Panic shot through me. Were they planning to burn me alive? But the flames stayed distant, a flickering beacon in the darkness. I nearly screamed as the first gunshot cracked through the night, quickly followed by a second. The chilling reality hit me. This wasn't a prank. It was real and dangerous. The same voice reassured me, "Stay put." For a moment, adrenaline urged me to fight, to burst out with my knife, but I had no idea what was out there. They had told me I would be safe if I stayed inside. It was a gamble, but I had no other choice. I stayed, huddled in my tent, a prisoner in my own adventure. 2 more gunshots echoed in the silent woods, followed by strange hooting and laughter, surreal, as if they were playing some twisted game. I had no idea what violence was happening, or how serious the threat was to me. All I knew was the voice continued to repeat, "Stay in the tent." At some point during that long, terrifying night, I saw the firelight finally dim and go out. Relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't be burned alive in my makeshift shelter. The blackness returned, complete. Somehow, eventually, the sheer psychological toll and exhaustion overtook me. I passed out, my mind shutting down, leaving me to find a brief, merciful escape in unconsciousness. The chanting continued, relentless, echoing through the black night. It was no longer just a threat. It was meant for me. If you leave, you'll die. My mind raced. Leave where? The trail? The tent? I called out, trying to steady my voice. Leave where? A chilling reply came. Leave the tent? Then, if you leave the tent, you will die. I swallowed hard. Will you kill me? Silence. Then a strange, haunting howl. My heart pounded as footsteps circled my tent. Terror gripped me as never before. I shifted, and a sharp voice snapped, "Do not come out." The footsteps grew frantic. Shouts and commotion erupted outside. Someone reignited my campfire. The flames flaring briefly, a fresh wave of panic. Were they trying to burn me out? But the fire stayed distant, just a flickering beacon in the dark. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, then another. The voice outside called again, "Stay put." I clutched my knife, torn between running and obeying. What was happening out there? More gunshots, hooting, and laughter echoed in the woods. A twisted, violent game. The fire eventually died, leaving me in darkness once more. Exhaustion and fear finally overwhelmed me, and I drifted into uneasy sleep, a prisoner in my own adventure.